Hello, my huge and beautiful audience. So, you may have heard recently the AI company Midjourney, they released something called the Midjourney Scanner under their new division called Midjourney Medical. So, what it is basically it's an ultrasound tomography machine where you stand on a platform, it lowers you through a ring of ultrasound sensors. There are about 500,000 ultrasound transducer elements. And so the big question is this going to work? If it does work, then is it going to be viable as a product? And if it is, then why Midjourney? Why are they, of all people, the right company to be making this product? And why are they making this pivot? Why are they releasing this now? Because you probably know Midjourney as a generative AI company. They make mostly image models. You prompt some text and they spit out some image. There's a lot of debate about this kind of technology, but that's what Midjourney has been doing for a long time, at least in terms of relative AI time. So what makes them well positioned to make this technology? It seems strange, but I think in a certain way it's unsurprising, because a lot of what these ultrasound scanners do, there's the hardware component and there's software component. In terms of the hardware component, obviously it seems like Midjourney would have to enter into some sort of partnership with people who have experience doing that already, because obviously Midjourney has no experience making ultrasound sensors. But in terms of the software component, it does seem like they have something to offer, because a lot of the benefit of these scanners is reconstructing the 3D image after the fact. And an AI company like Midjourney, we've seen that they could do impressive things already with whatever you want to say. These generative AI models, if you're cutting edge, that is pretty impressive. You have to have pretty smart people who do that, and it takes up a lot of GPUs, a lot of compute to crunch the numbers and generate those images. If instead of generating like a 2D image based on a prompt, instead you're generating a 3D image essentially based on the output of these scanners, it seems like a sort of similar type of problem where you're just like processing it through GPUs and spitting out the result. Now, before I get further into this, you may be wondering, okay, so what qualifies me to talk about this or say anything about the ultrasound scanner? Am I a biological professional, a doctor, a scientist, someone with experience or know-how in biology? No. Am I someone who has insider knowledge of Midjourney or worked at Midjourney or works as an AI engineer specifically? No, not really. Am I someone who's like an investor and can analyze this company from the standpoint of financial decisions? No, basically I'm none of those. So why should you listen to me? Well, I don't know if you should, but I think I have some interesting things to say about this because I've been thinking about it for a while, and I think it fits into a lot of ideas that I have about this concept of full body scanners generally. So I'm going to approach this as an engineer, and there are a few things that I know as an engineer about productivity and about technological leaps and about how to make that happen. If you've never seen my channel before, I make usually two types of videos with light editing and videos with no editing. So if you see it being rough around the edges, that's why. I'm just trying to make more videos. I haven't posted in about a month, and usually these types of videos are a lot quicker to make. Sorry to bore you with this. I just want to talk about this topic. Also, one detail, if you noticed, is the audio quality is pretty shaky right now, but it will get better later into the video. So I want to start off with a certain claim, and if you're a medical doctor, you're probably going to disagree with this. You're probably going to say, what about this? What about that? But I think most people will know what I mean. It kind of feels like during my lifetime and even before that, the progress that's been made in medical science has been slow and disappointing. Now, why do I say that? Okay, I am aware that there are a few examples of progress that have been made, but let's compare this to other areas. So the quintessential example of rapid technological improvement is Moore's Law, where in the category of making transistors, we've been extremely successful in technological improvement of making more and more and more transistors. Moore's Law says that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years, or you could also pose this as saying that the cost halves. And it's really astounding the degree to which technology has improved when it comes to computing technology. Moore's Law is almost a parody of itself. How could this possibly work? If you were to go to someone in 1970 and you could talk to Gordon Moore and say, hey, this is a neat little, device that you've come up with. Yes, you have this cute little pattern where computers are getting better and better, but this can't possibly hold. It can't possibly hold to up to like 2010 or whatever. Because after a certain point, if you extrapolate this too far, then you're going to get to an absurdity where it's like you're running out of space on the atom to literally create the transistors. And obviously you could never get to the level where you're like literally running out of space on the atoms to create and draw out the microtransistors. But basically we got there. Basically we hit the physical limits of physics. And just saying that's the case seems like an absurdity. It seems like a reductio ad absurdum that you could ever even get to that level, even entertain that level. And the microchips and the machines that make the microchips and the machines that make the machines that make the microchips, these are some of the most sophisticated machines in the world. And somehow it all works. By some miracle, we get computers with millions and millions of microchips in them. So it really is a testament to human ingenuity that Moore's law has held true for as long as it has. Has this held true in biology? Obviously not, right? In biology, you have kind of the opposite thing. You have Eroom's law, which says that the number of drugs produced per R&D dollar roughly halves every 9 years. I would compare this to Nassim Taleb has this idea of mediocristan versus extremistan. If you look at things that only improve by like 10% or improve by 20% or maybe get worse by 10 or 20%, that's mediocristan. Like there's small variation within there. As far as things that improve by greater extremes, like double or triple or 10x or 100x or get 1000x better, that's extremistan. And it feels like medical technology, it improves by little bits here and there. Maybe there's some advancement to a new drug or something, but it's not going to extend our life by like doubling our lifespan. We're not getting like the life extension technology that the futurists are saying will someday come. We're not getting anything close to that. It's like, if anything, life expectancy has been stagnant in developed countries. Like in the US, I haven't seen any massive improvement on the level of extremistan, of like doubling the lifespan. But you do get that in computing technology. You get like 10x the number of transistors on the microchip, right? So I don't really buy the idea that, well, of course life extension is going to be slow because biology is just so complicated, and well, it's just so complicated. What can you do? Well, yeah, it's complicated, but I don't know, man. Like, if I look at some of those machines to create the microchips, those are pretty complicated too. So I don't really know that the problem is how complicated it is. I think the real problem is where the complexity is coming from. Is the complexity coming from like an evolved chaotic system that we have really low insight into? Or is the complexity coming from a controlled environment where everything we try to account for perfectly and set in stone exactly according to human designs? Imagine if it were flipped. Imagine if the amount of progress that we had in computers was the level of progress we've had over the last 50 years in biology, and the level of progress we've had in biology was the level of progress we've had in computers in like raw numeric terms of lifespan improvement mapping onto Moore's law, right? At this point, anything close to that, we would be living to 500, and meanwhile we would have, basically no computers. That's what it would be like if it were flipped. But is that conceivable? I'm open to the idea that maybe it's actually impossible. Maybe the way that things worked out is just how it was always going to work out. There are fundamental differences between these two industries, and the level of success that we've had in computing, maybe for some reasons we could never have that in biology. But I'm not ready to give up yet. I'm not ready to resign to the idea that that's the outcome. I think we should be thinking bigger. I think we should be thinking more creatively and more extreme. I have a list of things that are critical for engineering productivity and like principles for productivity in general. And strangely enough, all these things are very relevant to the Midjourney scanner. So let's go through. First is quick iteration loops. That is fast feedback loops. You try something, you see if it works, and then you try something else and you see if it works, and you try it and see if it works over and over again. You can see analogies to this in like a comedian trying out a joke. The comedian tries out a joke and immediately gets feedback. Either someone laughs or someone doesn't laugh. And then a little while later, next night, they try out their set again, they tell the same joke. and see if it gets a laugh that time. But the feedback is immediate. There's no delay between telling the joke and hearing whether people laugh or not. And you can't fake that. You can't fake whether people laugh. So getting true, verifiable feedback like that. Similar if you're testing out a rocket. At first, you might not want to build a huge rocket. You might want to build a small, like, bottle rocket. And then if that works, you move to a bigger rocket and then a bigger rocket. And then each day, each week, you're trying out bigger and bigger rockets to the point where you get to, like, $1 million rocket. If you're a software engineer, you're testing using unit tests. So you write some code, you run the unit test, see if it works, write some more code, and you run the unit test again, see if there's any regressions, and that unit test is a verifiable, like, reproducible check of whether your code works. Iteration loops and that speed of iteration is not just like a single helpful thing to have to make you slightly more productive. It like basically is the definition of productivity, where if you take your day, you take the number of iteration loops in your day, that is the speed of productivity. So the thing that is making this confusing is it's not a subtraction problem, it's a division problem. So to explain what I mean, let's take the case where you're a software engineer and you're making changes to your code and you're working in a big project, a big established legacy project, and what you do is you write some code, you test it to make sure it works. You write some more code, test it. You write some more code, test it. And that's your cycle. That's your iteration. Now, how do you test it? Well, let's say you have a lengthy build process where before you can actually run your tests, you need to generate the build, and the build takes 10 minutes to run. And let's say, so you're waiting 10 minutes for the build to generate, and then you need to wait 5 more minutes for the tests to run, because the tests take 5 minutes to run. So altogether, it takes 15 minutes after you make a change to see whether it was successful or not. So, okay, simple enough. Here's the quiz. How many iterations, how many cycles are there in your day? Well, you're not coding for all 8 hours, all working hours, because you're doing other administrative stuff. So let's say for 7 of those hours, you're actually engaging with the code, you're coding. Well, what you do is you say, there's 60 minutes in an hour, the iteration time is 15 minutes, that goes into an hour 4 times, so 7 times 4 is 28, so it's just a division problem. There are 28 cycles in the day. Now, waiting around for 15 minutes for all that to happen is a pretty long time. It's actually ridiculous. So let's say you figure out how to solve this problem, you figure out how to make the build take faster, you figure out how to make the tests run faster, so instead of them all taking 15 minutes, now it just takes 1 minute. We can redo the quiz again. How many iterations are there in the day? Well, there are 60 per hour times 7. That's 60 times 7. That's 420 cycles in the day. So that's a big, big difference. So it's not like if you think, oh, you made the build take faster, you made the unit test take faster, now instead of taking 15 minutes, it takes 1 minute. So you've saved 14 minutes. Wrong. No, you haven't saved 14 minutes because you're thinking about it all wrong. You're not just subtracting those 14 minutes because this is an iteration, this is a loop. So you're running it again and again and again. So instead of just taking your day and subtracting away the 14 minutes that you saved, what you need to do instead is treat it as a division problem where you're taking the day, you're dividing by the cycle time. If you decrease the cycle time, then you're dividing by a smaller number, which means you're multiplying the amount of cycles you have, which you're multiplying the overall productivity in your day. And this is like the definition of productivity, right? It's not just like cycle time as a useful mechanism. The number of cycles is the amount of work that you get done. So I really think that cycle time and iteration loops is the most important thing in terms of productivity. Another most important thing for productivity is expanding visibility, expanding how much you can see into the system. Where let's say you have like a large barrel, and typically the way that you interact with the barrel and figure out what's inside of the barrel, you're not really sure what's inside of the barrel, but it's like a long tube and there's a tiny hole on one side and there's a tiny hole on the other side. And the way you figure out what's in the tube is you stick things inside one of the holes, and then it causes a big long process inside the tube, and then on the other end of the tube, things will be coming out of that tiny hole on the other side. And then you inspect the things that come out the other side, and you think, I have a theory based on what I put in that explains that this is why I got this out. And you can keep doing this, and it's like you have all these complicated theories about what's inside the tube. Well, how about just making the tube out of glass? And then you can see in through the glass, you can see everything immediately what's going on in the tube in real time. Isn't that better? This is something that's very analogous actually to the way a lot of people debug computer programs, where you sort of run it with different inputs, and depending on what input you tried to pass in, you can get different outputs, and then you can develop like a mental theory of what's happening inside the program based on the different outputs that you're getting. Or you can try like inserting printf debug statements here and there, and that provides like a little bit more information because that's other kinds of outputs on certain lines of the code. But all in all, it's not very much information. What about introducing a debugger? The thing is, a debugger is kind of poorly named because it makes it sound like it's specifically for finding bugs and that's it, but really a debugger should be called like the thing for understanding what your program is doing, where what it does is you can stop it at any point, and then it's a program which runs on top of your program, and this debugger program will allow you to like pause it at some point that you specify, and then you can hover over your cursor and like any variable, and it will tell you that value of that variable, and you can see like everything that's happening inside your program. So the developer Brett Victor made this point. He was talking about how when you write an algorithm, essentially you look at the code and you have to interpret, as in your mind as a programmer, you have to understand what the algorithm is doing. And part of how you do that is by like rerunning the algorithm in your own mind with little examples. And so the minds of people who become good programmers traditionally are people who have the kind of mind which is good at like simulating with little examples what an algorithm is doing. But why do we need to do that at all? Why don't we just we have computers that automate stuff for us. Why don't we just ask the computer exactly what it's doing, and the computer can just tell us what it's doing? So that's kind of the philosophy of a debugger. And more, the things that go in that direction, I trust. All of science, basically, all that we know about science and expansion of our scientific knowledge is based on gaining new instruments to see more into the system what it's actually doing, where like 90% of the discoveries in science are downstream from figuring out little tricks that we can do with glass to refract light in different ways, where it can expand how much we can see. So we take a telescope and we point it at the sky, and we can see things that are very far away. We can see them as if they're up close, and based on that we can chart the movements of the planets and all that, and then we have to invent new forms of math in order to accurately represent what's going on in the planets. And so a lot of mathematical discoveries are kind of downstream from those observations. On the other hand, if you take the telescope and instead of pointing it up at the sky, you point it down at the dirt and the stuff around us, then it becomes a microscope. And with the microscope, you can learn about the microbes and the entire ecosystem of microbiology, which it turns out is like an entire world, an entire ecosystem that we didn't even know about. And occasionally that ecosystem will come up and affect us on the larger scale through like viruses and stuff like that, or like parasites, where there is some crossover between our two worlds, between our macro world and our micro world. And by introducing microscopes, we learn about, to the extent that our macro world is affected by the world of the microbes, by the germ theory of disease, we learn about that. So many insights into biology and into chemistry, we learn about chemistry, and everything is downstream from microscopes as well. But it's the same trick with glass as telescopes, of being able to see things as if they're closer. The Germans have this word of like Umwelt, which is the world that you're exposed to through your sensory organs, and it's sort of like, your world is limited by what you're even capable of interacting with through your sense organs. And if a world is not exposed to you through your sense organs, either it's too small or too big or too different or something, it's like the world doesn't even exist to you. And the job of science, the project, the lineage that science has been on the last few hundred years, is like Umwelt expansion. It's saying, hey, like our eyes are not good enough, so we're going to do tricks with glass to see things that are really small or really far away. And it's like getting better eyes because our eyes aren't good enough. And based on getting those better eyes. Everything else, all of these running experiments and coming up with good theories, the people who do that are geniuses, but they wouldn't even get to like step one if it wasn't for being able to see it. Another principle I would like to promote is the idea of like bulk data analysis. So if you look at how most medical interventions work, it's one-to-one, which is you're targeting a specific area of the body, you're targeting a specific organ to screen, and you're looking to get the result on a specific disease. So that's a one-to-one pairing. On one side, you have one specific disease you're screening for. On the other side, you have one specific organ or one specific biomarker or like cluster of biomarkers that you're screening for. Whereas with generalized screening, with basically whole body scans, whole body screening, you're going from one-to-one to end-to-end. So on the one hand, you're not screening for any particular disease, you're screening for basically every disease. And on the other hand, you're not screening like one biomarker or one data point or one organ, you're screening every organ, so you're screening the whole body. And the case I'm trying to make to you now is that the second one is better. That instead of going for a little targeted screening here, a little targeted screening there, that actually that's the way the medical system typically does things. Well, the paradigm shift that I think will let us identify diseases way more quickly is going to looking for every disease at once, looking at the whole body at once. So that's the philosophy of these Midjourney scanners. So why is that better? Because with modern techniques, with modern AI, statistics, modern ways of analyzing data, machines are so good at finding correlations that humans never would have thought of, or finding little connections, or finding weird things, weird correlations, where if you feed it a chunk of data and just let it rip and let it try to find something in that data, it will find things that a human never would have thought to look for. So the problem with these targeted scans is, like, sure, it can find things which, you know, we've previously identified and humans have like done the research on it and figured out, okay, there's this correlation here. But it can't find the 1,000 obscure correlations that a machine can. Additionally, let's say that a single cure gets way better. Let's say we completely cured cancer in the US. That would only increase life expectancy for 3 years, because I don't know the name of this principle, but curing any particular disease doesn't go far enough. So even if we go really far in curing any particular disease, then the things that take over is every other disease. So really, the way to advance life expectancy is really, you can't pick and choose and like cure one disease here, one disease there, because if you only isolate your cure to one area, then all the other areas will take over and be a problem for you. Really, the way to advance life expectancy is to try to cure like every disease at once. Come up with some generalized system or generalized cure. That's another point in favor of these like generalized whole body scans. Okay, on the point of being able to find weird correlations, the example that I like a lot relates to gender screening or sex like identification. Now, modern machine learning algorithms are insanely good at predicting someone's sex based on things you would never think of. So sex. What is sex? Well, sex is determined by the hormones that you're exposed to while you're in the womb, but you also have secondary sex characteristics, which permeates many areas of the body. You have like 1,000 different secondary sex characteristics that vary in degree from more prominent to less prominent. And so when you look at someone, you can make usually a pretty good guess about what that person's sex is, but in a way where you don't exactly know what it is. It's like, oh, well, their facial structure is a little bit different. So humans are running this sort of algorithm too, where it's little subtleties in secondary sex characteristics that they're using to identify sex. And machines can do the same thing, where I read this paper that when you have someone type information into a text box in a website, then that website, if you pass it through a machine learning algorithm, that machine learning algorithm can, with insane degree of accuracy, predict whether the person is a male or female, not based on any of the words that they're writing, but literally based on their typing pace. Like literally the time interval difference between pressing the R key and the C key, or like I'm making up what the specific keys are, but machine learning algorithms have figured out what the specific key patterns are, where it's not that men or women type faster across the board, it's just their rhythm of how they type out certain keys or not. It reliably predicts like 90% accuracy what their gender is. And that's shocking, right? Like you never would think that that would be the case, but somehow they figured it out. Another example, I don't know if this was for gender or for something else, but if you if you take a photo of someone's iris, just the iris, none of the eye area around it, then feed that into a machine learning algorithm. The algorithm can predict whether or not you're a man or a woman. But if you ask a human to explain how is it doing this, it's like a black box. Like no human understands how this neural network is predicting your gender. But somehow there's something in your iris which is telling the algorithm, hey, this person's a man or this person's a woman. And no human would be able to identify that because we don't tend to stare into people's iris. But apparently there's some difference where if you look at it, you can reliably tell that. Why do I bring this up, right? Well, the natural extrapolation of this is, well, if you can look into someone's iris and see their gender, can you look into their iris and see whether or not they have cancer or something? Like it may be the case that having some weird pattern in the pancreas reliably predicts brain cancer or something, and no human would ever think that there's a correlation there. But it turns out if you throw bulk data at it and it looks for like 1 billion correlations, then some of those correlations are really esoteric things like, oh, it turns out that there is like a 0.2 correlation between this pattern in the pancreas and brain cancer. But why is that the case? Who knows? It's just that the body is this really obtuse system. People often make the criticism, I heard, of the Midjourney Scanner. Well, how good can this really be? Because ultrasound doesn't do a good job seeing through bones or seeing through air, and that means it can't see through the lungs, and it can't see through this and that. And my point is, like, you almost don't need to see through the lungs. It almost doesn't matter. Probably, like, seeing 90% of other things in the body and trying to predict how the lungs are based on correlations is going to tell you more about the lungs than being able to directly see the lungs. Just throw bulk data at it. It's like a change in perspective in how we go about figuring out how the body works. Is if you just say, hey, here's the whole human body, I know that you didn't get very good data about the lungs, but just find correlations and let it rip, then you almost don't need to feed it directly information about the lungs. Or yeah, there are parts, organs here and there which it doesn't get good data on because of the limits of ultrasound. But based on the power of just throw all data at it, bulk data analysis, this is much more predictive actually. So having said all that, given what I value, I think it should become clearer why I'm so bullish on the Midjourney Scanner. Because ultrasound machines exist already, but for the most part, the way that ultrasound machines work now is you think, oh, this body part is hurting. So you go to the doctor and the doctor sends you to someone to do the ultrasound machine, and the nurse comes over. The ultrasound machine is like a wand, and they wand over the part of your body that has these, illness that they're testing for. And then it's a 2D image that comes up in real time, and they just wand over it. This is a completely different paradigm. This is full body scanner, which is what I was talking about as far as full bulk data analysis. The business tactic here is they're going to set up Midjourney spas all around. So instead of being a diagnostic tool, it's more of a proactive wellness tool. So you go to the Midjourney spa, you book this proactively just to see how you're doing, and you could have this on a regular schedule. Every month you go to the Midjourney spa and you get scanned. And this is a very automated process, a very consistent process, fast. You sit in there, you stand in the machine. It takes exactly a minute, and it's the same every time, basically. And so it's an automated way to do it with the ability to go to the spa and go back and back, and the fact that it's proactive, that means you're getting calm and consistent feedback on regular intervals. So I think this is exactly what we want as far as people monitoring their health, is getting consistent feedback. For example, if I, right now, the amount of feedback that I get on my body is very small. I can stand on a scale to figure out how much I weigh. I can look at my body when I'm in the shower to see if my skin everything is going right with my skin. I can make sure that I'm feeling well and that I'm not feeling tired and that I'm feeling generally okay and not queasy and not like there's any problem with my vision or hearing or anything like that. However, my ability to actually inspect the inside of my body is very small right now. Pretty much the only organs that I get really direct vision into is the teeth and the hair and the skin and the eyes, right? Because those are on the surface. Anything below that, I can't see. But we want people to get consistent feedback on their health because they can see, okay, this week I started a new diet. How is that affecting me? Now I check, I go on the scale. Oh, I lost some weight already. Then I continue with the diet for a month. Is that still working? Oh, I didn't lose as much weight as I expected. Okay, better switch to something else. Oh, is this food affecting my health? And the ability to swap in and out foods. The thing is, human bodies are very different. And we can give general advice like this food is healthier than this food, but there is nothing better than giving personalized advice as far as, hey, this is how your body is responding right now to that thing, because then people can adjust to it in a feedback loop where they get the feedback, they adjust, they get more feedback, they adjust, they get more feedback, they adjust, and each iteration they're slowly improving, and this is an addictive process because it's like optimization, and it's insane the degree to which people are once they get feedback onto their own health, it's very motivating to improve it. Right now, it's basically guesswork. It's like, okay, I'm going to eat the green beans instead of the eggs because someone told me that green beans are healthier than eggs. But I don't actually know, given my unique circumstances, my body, my lifestyle, that it's having that beneficial impact. Like, in reality, this is true a lot of times in science and investigations when what you expect, what you hypothesize, is just way off from the actual truth. It could be, oh, switching to eggs or to broccoli, that's like not having a big impact. But there's this one other thing which is like totally messing up your health and you had no idea. But it becomes obvious once you can see clearly into the process, into its inner workings. You can see into your body and see, oh crap, like once I switched away from this product to this product, immediately I got healthier. Because again, the human body is so obtuse, it's really hard to go based on heuristics to say this is better than this in all cases. You have to actually see the real-time update. And therefore, something like the Midjourney Scanner, where you're going in more frequently, you're getting scanned, it's a large scan, you're getting a lot of information a lot of the time. It's very easy to update on that. So let me describe to you my dream world system of how I think healthcare should work post-paradigm shift when everyone lives to be 150, okay? In my dream world medical system, when I describe this, a bunch of fire alarms are going to light up in your brain, and you're going to think, this is horrible, this is not going to work for reason 1, 2, 3. Don't worry about that. At the end of this, I'll address all the concerns that you have. But first, let me just lay out what it is. So basically in the system, people get scanned and measured all the time, constantly, like to the maximum extent that people can be measured, which is, you know, when you're 5 years old, you send in a DNA test, all of the data, including DNA test data, it gets sent to the super secure Health Central Database, TM. And everyone has a body scanner in their home, so something like the Midjourney Scanner, forget health spas. No, everyone in their bathroom, in addition to having the sink and having the toilet and having the shower, everyone has like 2 or 3 different body scanning devices, such as, let's say, the Midjourney Scanner. And like once a week you get in, it scans you, and it collects all that data, it gets sent up to the super secure Health Central Database, TM, and so the Health Central Database, it collects everyone's data of every single person in the whole country. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, you also send in blood samples, so you get your blood taken about once a week, and also you like urinate in a cup once a week, and that gets sent off too. So basically all of your data is being sent up, and you can opt out of this, right? Obviously, you can opt out, but then you don't get the benefits of it, so it's a trade-off. And so anyway, inside of the database is like machine learning algorithms that are being trained off of all of the data of all the people in all the world, and it's being trained to like find every possible correlation it can possibly find. And it's also being cross-referenced against all of the diagnoses that are being assigned to all people. So you go into the doctor's office, if you're feeling wrong or you're feeling sick, the doctor diagnoses you, and all of the diagnoses get sent up to the database, and your diagnosis is cross-referenced with like the health data that you sent in about your body scan and your blood test and your urine sample and all that. And based on that, it is like training for the AI system to learn that that particular body composition and biometrics is associated with that particular diagnosis. And then meanwhile, all the people who are sending in their data all times with their body scans and stuff, they get checked against that, and then it comes back with AI generated recommendations that say, we predict that based on your latest samples, you have a 2% chance of having this disease, a 1.5% chance of having this disease, a 1% chance of having this disease, a 0.8 chance of having this disease, and it's just an ordered list of all the diseases it predicts you have. Maybe it's like very low percentages, so you don't have to worry about it. So like most people, it's not going to predict they have any sort of disease. But if like something is too worrying, or it goes above a certain threshold, then like let's say something goes above like 10% chance, then depending on the severity of the disease, then you might choose to go in to see the doctor and then get an official diagnosis from the doctor. And the doctor can also look at your like charts and look at your samples, provided that you give your doctor availability to this. They look at like all the data that you give them, and based on that, they like recommend what further tests you need, what else you need. And there's also like the typical annual checkup where they might run additional tests. So that's not even the end of it. And so in this world, basically the goal is to, like, when you get a disease, we catch it immediately after you get it. So especially this is important for like life-threatening diseases, where if it takes a long time for us to catch it, then it's a worse outcome. We want to catch those immediately. And the blood that you get sent in, it gets sent to blood gigafactories, and then those blood gigafactories that are like scattered throughout the nation, they run a battery of tests on all the blood of all the people in all the country. And we also have like an entrepreneurship system where people can come up with new tests to like provide additional insights into the blood. So if you have like, if you're an inventor and you come up with a new test, this is the new test I can run on the blood, then it's up to you to foot the bill to run the test on the blood, but you get compensated in accordance with like a statistical analysis of to what degree the additional data that you provide about the blood is helpful for diagnosis. So you can calculate this. There is like a variety of algorithms. There's like the Sharpley value, which is a test to calculate how much additional information statistically a new test is providing. So based on the sharp values, like if the sharp values are too low, then you get compensated less. If the sharp values are higher, then you get compensated more. And based on that, it will determine whether or not it's economically feasible for you to finance the running of your new experimental test on like all the blood. But obviously your test also has to be validated to make sure that the results are accurate. And so it's like way more complicated than that. But does that make sense, right? So also the person who invents the test, they don't get like the data, right? They get the results of how accurate the test is, but they don't like necessarily like we can contract it out to someone in secure facilities to run the tests. That way some random idiot can't just like impose their testing on everyone and collect data. So all the data is super secure. Like your data belongs to you. No one else can see your data unless you provide explicit access. Not even your doctor can see your data unless you provide explicit access, not the government, not anyone. So this needs to be a really locked down system. But the concept is, because it's operating on more data than any doctor can possibly analyze, it can pick up on correlations that no doctor or nurse would ever notice. Because if you think about it, right, doctors have very limited amounts of information. They hear your description, maybe they can run some test or some other thing, but mainly the profession of being a doctor, like the profession and industry of medicine as it is right now, is very like medieval almost, where it's based on heuristics and it's based on guesswork. We don't have some complicated statistical correlation thing that runs on every patient to help and assist with the diagnostics. And by the way, like the correlations would not be fully responsible for the diagnostics. A formal diagnosis would still be provided by the doctor, but like these tests would help. They would tell you what to look for. And if you want, you can just like download your own data, and if you don't want to send it to a doctor, you can just like have an LLM summarize your results and like tell you, hey, like you probably shouldn't worry. And 99% of the time, depending on what results you get back, you're not going to have to worry. Even if you showed it to a doctor, the doctor should just say like, hey, you don't have anything to worry about. Or hey, you might have like some small thing, but just start eating better. Or you have some small thing, you want to run an additional test. Or, oh no, you have a big thing, we need to do something right away. But there is still a big role for a doctor in this system. But I think we have to leverage like AI and technology and, machine learning and digitization way more than the medical system is right now. Okay, so I may have like exaggerated a few points there, but I think you get my general idea of my vision here. And I did say at the beginning that you may have certain alarm bells going off in your head. So let's go through them one by one, right? One alarm bell that may go off in your head is the idea, well, won't this just be so expensive? Do I really think everyone is going to have a scanner in their bathroom? Won't that be so expensive? But I don't know about that, because think of the things that used to be more expensive and that now everyone has access to. The price of computers, which I've already touched on. The price of televisions. Like, things that can be made in a factory, products, due to economies of scale, over time the price goes down. So what I'm trying to do is galvanize you to think more ambitiously, more creatively, and more boldly. To say, yes, right now it is expensive because we don't have the economies of scale and these things are super regulated, a million rules and stuff like that. And yeah, everything in healthcare is super regulated because we have a screwed up price structure. But that is like a regulatory issue. That's fixable. We've seen that in many places in the economy, prices can go down when they're made in factories. So why not do that? Another way of thinking about it is there's different kinds of problems. There's cursed problems where no matter what you do, it's going to involve trade-offs and you can't really solve the problem and we don't really know what to do. Then there are problems of scarcity where actually there is a solution here. We just know we just have to grow the economy and get better and better. And with time, eventually, the price will go down and down and down. And we know this is possible. The quality of cars has improved over time due to capitalism. This is an optimization problem. It's all it is. And so I understand right now it's too expensive. But if we think long term, it's just a problem of scarcity, which means it's fixable. The next thing you might think is, well, the plan that I've laid out is not feasible because it's privacy violating. Privacy, bioethics, privacy, right? To be fair, I did clarify that this is your data, you have access to it, you control who has access to it. So under my system, the rules will be that like random corporations aren't going to access without your permission. Insurance companies are not going to be able to use that against you. But you might still be skeptical. You might think, well, I did say that everything needs to be in a centralized database, and I made the recommendation because the data needs to be centralized in order to be efficient for machine learning training. And so by virtue of the fact that the data is all centralized, doesn't this make it more vulnerable for, the temptation of the government to grab the data more, or hackers or leaks to release the data? And I think, yeah, maybe that is a risk, and the solution is just to lock down the data more and implement controls and safeguards to make sure that the data doesn't leak and that doesn't happen. And maybe that's unsatisfying, but what's unsatisfying to me is to say, well, we can never improve this process because there is this risk that we associate with changing. Whenever you change something, there's always going to be some risk associated with that, but how long is that going to last? Are you going to say, let's hold back progress forever? Because it's like the people who say, let's, prevent a new technology from coming about because it's going to take our jobs. I mean, like self-driving cars will take our jobs. Maybe that works in the short term, but over the long term, do we believe that we're just never going to have that technology because of the jobs that exist right now? No, there needs to be a transition, and that's sort of how I feel about, if we have a process that is obviously superior, but there is some risk associated with that, can you just lock down the old way forever? That's not acceptable to me. I feel like we have to take everything holistically and do the cost-benefit analysis on what you're gaining. On the topic of the government having access to this stuff, it's true that you're sort of taking it on trust that the government isn't going to look at it. But isn't that sort of true already? Because why doesn't your doctor just leak your health information? It's because there are government regulations to prevent that from happening. And so if the government wanted to screw with you, they could always do with that. They could always grab your information from your doctor. But at a certain level, you have to make peace with the fact that you have no other option than to like trust the authorities and trust the government to not screw with you, because it's already the case that they can screw with you if you want. So it's not really changing anything. You just have to trust that if we pass a law that says the government can't look at your data, that they're not going to look at your data. When it comes to these things like hypothetical objections that I've come up with, or perhaps some other objections you come up with, I think there's a level of status quo bias where people think like, okay, it can't be centralized. What if the government abuses it? What about hackers? These are sort of problems that are coming up because we can't imagine anything different than our current system. If we were born in a country in the future where this was just the way things are, this was the default, then we wouldn't even think to question it. And many things are like that, I think. Another more subtle argument that I need to cover for the sake of completeness is you could say, I don't consent to having my data trained on as part of this machine learning algorithm. And I would say to that is, okay, that's fine, but you can always opt out. Like from the beginning, I said you can opt out of this process. Then I think the trade-off should be that you also don't get the benefit of the machine learning predictions. And so people can make that decision. If they really don't want their data being trained on, they can say, hey, don't like use me for machine learning training. But I think most people will consent to being used for training data because they get the benefit in exchange for that of you will get the predictions that the machine learning model spits out about you. So it's all a trade-off for people to decide. On the question of why would people not want their health information being used to train machine learning models, I think some people are a bit overly cautious about this because they don't really understand how it works. So not all AI is the same. And the kind of AI that I'm actually advocating for here is not even like generative AI. It's not LLMs, it's not like generative art or generative text. It's just straight up old school, old fashioned like statistics basically. It's just like making, predictions on diagnoses based on neural networks that are trained on health information. And so there's really very little that you can extract from that because you can't do like these sophisticated techniques such as prompt injection if all you're doing is you're getting a statistical report at the end of the day, like you have this percentage chance of having this disease, right? You could argue still that maybe to the extent that people have their information processed as part of the training data, that maybe you could like backwards engineer the specifics of someone's health information based on someone else's results. But that is extremely unlikely to be the case because there are millions of people in this system and you are just one data point out of millions. And, out of a million people that have a disease, if you're one of those people that gets diagnosed with the disease, and the fact that you get diagnosed with that is used as one input into the prediction of whether you have that disease, then someone else getting a certain score on their health report, there's no possible way it can be traced back to you if you understand how these things work. There are ways of correcting for this if it is an issue. Like for the US Census, I heard a while back they were using like fuzzing techniques to prevent people from backwards engineering where the data came from. But the degree to which you actually need to do that, you could do it if you needed to. You could kind of fuzz the data, but I don't think you would even need to do that. The only case when this would theoretically be applicable are for people with extremely rare diseases, they're like 1 of 50 people in the entire world with that disease. If you're such a person, then you could argue, hey, like the fact that I'm a member of this training set and I have this extremely rare disease, maybe they can backwards engineer the fact that I had it based on like other publicly available facts about me and like the fact that I'm actually influencing the outcome. Even 1 in 50 would not be enough. It would need to be such a rare disease that only like 5 people in the world have it. In that case, I think it's up to that individual to make the determination whether to opt out of being like a member of the training data. However, it's such a great benefit to the entire world that person is a member of the training data, because exactly what these kinds of things are good at versus human doctors is identifying those extremely rare diseases where a human doctor in their entire career would never see a patient who has like a 1 in 5 in the entire world disease. But these AI algorithms, they don't care. They know about thousands, millions of diseases. So they can catch, hey, you have these extremely esoteric symptoms. That's because you have this extremely rare disease. And there are going to be a lot more people who get identified correctly with that based on these like immense predictive power of these algorithms. And I think that's such a great benefit that anyone with a truly rare disease, they would jump at the chance to opt into the system and like have their data used in exchange for they get information about what their condition is, what their diagnosis is. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still people deciding what trade-off they want to take. But I think even in the most extreme case, the trade-off greatly favors opting in. The last point for me to address, I think, is the most important issue and is the most prominent and interesting and difficult issue to address, which is to say, there is a strain of thought in the medical community which says not that testing is bad, because obviously that would be taking it too far, but saying that you should sort of try to ration out testing, or saying that it's like a level of skepticism that says that overly zealous or overly eager or proactive testing is bad. And there are a few arguments given for it. I'll put these arguments into two categories. One set of arguments says that the benefits of these tests is overrated for various statistical reasons. Another side says that there are actually harms to conducting these tests. So first of all, let me just acknowledge some sort of statistical irregularities that affect how you look at the data. It is the case that if you look at populations, one group of population with the disease that were tested early and one group of population with the disease that were tested later, then the population that was tested early has better survival rates. But there are certain things biasing that result that I want to acknowledge. First of all, it's also the case that if you test more early or proactively, then you're going to find relatively milder cases of the disease, as opposed to the people who you test later, who maybe you only test them after they have obvious symptoms. The people who you test later, they have stronger cases of the disease. So by testing early, you're sort of biasing the sample, where you're also looking at people with milder cases of the disease who would have had better survival rates anyway. And if you had included that group of people in both samples, then it would have removed the bias. But because you're only finding that group of people with the milder case in the cases where you test early, then it's sort of biasing the result because you're changing the denominator. Another thing you have to acknowledge is lead time bias, which is, let's say that you measure like survival rates based on the difference between when you first measured the disease and when the patient eventually succumbed to the disease. Well, for the group that you tested earlier, that length of time is going to look longer. But is that because you actually helped them by identifying the disease and you did anything curative? Not necessarily. Like, that's a bad way to measure it, because it's just also the case that for the group of people that you tested earlier, you found it earlier, so the length of time looks longer. It's not because you did anything, but you're biasing it by changing the first timestamp that you measure. Another situation you have to identify is, what if you find a disease, but the disease is very slow spreading? Like, you find a very slow spreading cancer, and you invest a lot of resources in curing the disease. That could just be like wasted resources curing it, because what if it was so slow spreading that it was not actually that big of a problem, and in fact, if the patient was older, they were like 70, more likely than not, they would have died from other causes, like natural causes, before the disease would have spread to the point where that would have killed them. So actually, by curing that disease, it's kind of pointless because they would have died of old age anyway. I'm not describing these things very precisely. There's a video by the channel Midlife Crisis who has a video, The Epidemic of Fake Diseases, so I'd recommend you watching that. That's a good kind of summary of some of these issues. I think to a large extent, those statistical issues are kind of off topic, because to the extent that people overestimate the benefit of screening early and often, I think that they should just not do that. And I'm not basing any of my assumptions based on the numbers that are derived from incorrect analysis of statistics, at least I don't think. So I think we should move on to the more important topic, which is to what extent is it, I keep saying to what extent, but yeah, to what extent is it actually bad to take action based on screening? Because the argument goes, okay, well, people are stupid, right? And when you screen them or you test them for some sort of issue, you're going to find something, probably most of the time, and then you're going to send them on a wild goose chase where they're going to spend tons of time, money, stress, time making appointments, going to the doctor's office, going and trying to investigate that issue, getting a battery of follow-up tests, getting unnecessary procedures to remove that when it was never really that necessary. Because like, if you think of it, on your skin all the time, you have like little imperfections and scars and moles and whatever, and you know that that's not a big deal, but inside your body, you have those same things too. You might have one of those things in your lungs. They're called different things depending on what organ is afflicted by it. But people without context, they may freak out and think, what, I have a mole here, and they may get on a wild goose chase and spend way too much time worrying about that. Let me quote from the Astral Codex 10 blog post where he discusses his thoughts on the Midjourney Scanner, because this is a relevant section. He says, all of your organs are constantly growing little pimple-like things that don't matter. Depending on the location and type, we call these cysts, polyps, fibroids, lipomas, adenomas, hematomas, etc. We are bad at distinguishing these from dangerous tumors. And so far, the studies show that when we try to do it on an entire population on a mass scale, we cause more problems than we solve. That could change in the future, but it's a separate bet from whether ultrasound tomography will be good or not, and the ultrasound tomography won't be very useful unless we solve this problem too. To answer this really simplistically, I think there is a trivial solution here. The trivial solution is for the medical professional to explain to the patient, hey, like this thing that you're worried about, actually, it's no big deal, and you should not take any action based on this, and you shouldn't worry about this, and you should just do nothing. And I think that's like a trivial solution. The problem is people are idiots, and people will worry about it and stress about it and pursue the issue, right? Now, on one level, I'm very sympathetic to this. I cited Nassim Taleb earlier in this video, and Nassim Taleb is, for example, a big believer in the do no harm ethic and the idea that doctors, a lot of times, they can just make things worse by taking unnecessary action, and a lot of professions are like this, where they feel like they have to do something, but by doing something, they just end up making things worse. And so I'm sort of sympathetic to the idea that that may be the case here. However, the idea that we should withhold information from patients because patients are stupid and are going to stress over something unnecessarily. To be clear, we're not actually withholding information from patients in this example, but it's sort of like lying by omission. It's saying, hey, we're going to withhold this test which would produce information because we're worried that that information would stress out the patient. So it's not quite like we have information we're withholding, but we're like not going out of our way to get information in the first place. I hate that. I hate the mindset behind that. I hate all the justification for why that's a good idea. I think part of that is like the liability of doctors don't want to get sued if they find something and they don't take action based on what they find. But if that's true, then the real takeaway is just that personal injury lawyers are evil. Or maybe not really. But if there's a problem with like tort law and doctors being too worried about getting sued, then that shows you like a problem with the system. So I don't take that seriously as a justified reason, because the real solution is to reform the system. Now, before I get into my stronger rebuttal of that line of thinking, I think as sort of an aside, I have a minor rebuttal, which is just to say, I hate the whole mindset of like, you can't handle the truth, we're gonna make sure that you don't get tested because we just think that you're too stupid and you're not gonna be able to handle the stress of it. I think that's an inherently patronizing way to look at your patients. And if we have a system which, even to the degree that that's accurate and people are stupid and people overreact, I think that that's like their problem, and instead we should just do a better job of informing people about how to properly respond to their testing. I feel like it's very patronizing to say, oh well, the doctors know better than you about what you should know about your own body. It's like, this is a very common mindset in some Asian countries. Like in Japan, for example, when an old person gets sick, it's, at least back in the day, it was common practice not to tell the old person. I think they still do this. Is like they tell the family, but they don't tell the elderly person that they're sick because I don't know. Like, I don't know what the point is of that. They don't want to stress out the old person, or like they don't want to be disrespectful, so they tell the family, and it's just kind of a ridiculous practice. And I feel like there's some echoes of that in here, which is like, we know better than you, we're not going to tell you. Even with good medical advice, there are some amount of patients who will get tested and then they will proceed to elect to take unnecessary medical procedures. And then there are some patients who won't. And I think that, notwithstanding the advice of do no harm, we can't have a rule of the minority. We can't allow it to be that because some people behave irresponsibly, that everyone else who behaves responsibly can't get the thing. Like, this paternalistic mindset really grates at me, and in a lot of different areas. Okay, beyond that, what about the issue of people getting stressed out, and as a result of the testing that they get, they might not take action, but they are stressed out about, like, what is this, and they think about it. I'll admit that I might fall into that category. I might get tested and then get stressed out about, like, some finding that they have some mass in my body, but still, philosophically, I would rather the information than not having the information. I think I'm entitled to that. I would rather know, just personally, and I feel like that does yield a better result over the long term. I feel like people being armed with more information, over the long term, they get an understanding of how they should behave, what is a problem, what is not, and what they should be worried about or not. My bigger rebuttal is that I think this problem is self-correcting, because the more information people have about their own bodies, the more they learn over time what kinds of things they should be worried about or what they shouldn't. I think the example of the skin is really informative and really telling, because the thing is this an issue with the skin? I have a lot of information with the skin because I can see it, it's on the surface, but I'm not worried about 90% of things that I see on the skin, because I've learned over time by looking at my skin over the years, okay, like, these are the kinds of things I should worry about, and these are the kinds of things I shouldn't. I have hundreds of freckles on my face, and never in my life have I worried about it being a health issue, because I understand these freckles are like just a pigmentation pattern, and that's been true my whole life, right? And different people who have different bodies learn whether or not one thing is true or the other. Like, I know how freckles function because I've had them for a long, long time, and you can't see them really well now because of, like, the lighting, and also because they fade as you age. But when I was a little kid, they were a lot more prominent, right? And I think the real solution here is just a sort of information overwhelm, where we present people with so much information that they just learn through their own body, okay, like, this I should be worried about or this I shouldn't. So instead of gatekeeping this sort of information behind the professionals in their subfield of science, where they know specifically what kinds of masses are cancerous or not from years and years of research, let's swing the gates wide open and present tons and tons of information to the people instead, and they'll learn their own bodies, and they'll be more invested in learning those things than they ever could be otherwise. As far as the philosophy of do no harm, you can probably guess what I'm going to say about that, which is that, taken to the extreme, it's an absurdity. Everything is a cost-benefit analysis, and you can never truly do zero harm.